So this URL up here is something I was going to get to in just a second. First announcement I wanted to make is homework. You may have noticed I moved the due date back. The auto grader's kind of coming along, but it took longer than I had hoped for, so I didn't want you guys freaking out, so I moved the due date back. And again, because it's really the kind of assignment that I'm going to have you guys do to just get experience working with something. It's not finally part of your final project or portfolio. However, people have been sending me kind of like, I'm not quite sure what's wrong with my code here, emails, which are really good. One of the things I wanted to mention is I've seen this in a few examples of code. All right. In your navigation bar, you have the links to your 4 pages. All right. So my first question for you guys is, if you can see it, it's A href equals C://si339 index.html. Is that a relative reference or an absolute reference? Technically, it's absolute, right? Because you're telling it exactly where to find it. A relative reference, you're assuming that it's in the same folder or a subfolder, and it knows to just look right there. And this is an absolute reference, which is giving it kind of a permanent location. Right? So this works really well when you're kind of testing your website on your laptop. Right? But the problem is, at some point, you need to put your website on Umish, right? Or whatever hosting site you prefer. But you need to post it. You need to get it out there live. Right? So there's a problem with this particular reference once you post it live. Right? The problem is, if someone clicks on it, they don't have access to your C drive. Right? So this is a perfectly fine reference for when you're first building things, but it's not going to work. All right. So when you're building your sites on your laptop, what you want to do is, in most cases, just use relative references for the files you're creating yourself. All right. If you want to put absolute references in, you need to figure out where you're going to host your site first. So instead of C://si339, it would probably be www-personal.umish, etc., all the way to wherever you're keeping it. Okay? So this is one of those annoying bugs that you don't notice until, oops, the assignment's due and it's suddenly not working because I didn't post it to the last minute. Okay?
So do all the photos or HTML documents that you use need to be saved in the Umish folder?
Yes, everything needs to be, sorry.
So what if there's pictures of the internet?
That's actually a good question. If it has an absolute reference that can be accessed from the internet, then you don't need it. So for instance, if you're using an image that's hosted on Google, you can just use that link. All right? Things like CNN.com clearly are fine. It's just the images that you are creating yourself that right now reside on your laptop. They all need to be uploaded.
Even if you save them in that public folder then?
As long as they're inside that public folder.
Okay.
Yeah, they just have to be in that public folder. I say that, however, what a lot of people do, and what the general idea is when you're making web pages, is a lot of people make an images folder. So they'll make a folder called images or IMG, and they put all their pictures in there. If you do that, you need to make sure you upload public HTML. You need to have that images folder in public HTML, and you need to make sure all your links have images/pic1.jpg, images/. Okay? So give yourself a day before the due date, which I keep moving back, which is nice for you, to kind of test out these little bugs. Okay? Which questions on that? I'm not done talking about the homework. You'll be glad to know. So for anyone who's gone on to C Tools, you might have noticed 2 things. Well, actually, I'll go to the 2 things in a second. First thing I wanted to mention is you don't have access to this. This is 539. There we go. I have decided on the due dates for the final. There's going to be 4 more assignments. Okay? So these will be up on 339 by the end of the day. They're not completely fleshed out, but you'll have your assignments and your due dates. The next one, JavaScript and jQuery, it's just going to be another badge. Okay? The one after that is going to deal with what we're talking about this week, which is going to be forms. All right? And I'm going to kind of recommend that you guys work in groups for the forms project, because I want you to make a really nice form that's got the styling, that's got the media queries in it. You're welcome to do it by yourself, but I think it's on the scale where you might prefer to work in a group on that one. Assignment 7 is going to be where we stop working on the client side. We're going to start working on that stuff that happens after they've browsed your code. So we're going to start using PHP. Okay? So right now when we send a form, say I've got someone's going to put in their name and their email address, what happens when we click on submit? Is anything if I have a get, if I used a get method, can you see what they put in? If you use the get method, that's when it gets appended to the URL. All right? If you use a post, you can't really see it very easily because it's hidden inside the CGI information. PHP is going to let us go in and kind of pull out all the data, start doing things. We're not going to write it to a database because I don't want to jump too far in one assignment. So we'll be writing all the information into like an Excel sheet or something like that. But you'll finally actually be able to get the data, and we'll do a little looping. PHP is what lets you do redirecting. If someone goes to your site, but you want to send them someplace else. And then the last assignment will be templates. All right? And again, we'll be using PHP for templates. This is where we're going to have all your code for perhaps your header in one file, all your code for your footer in another file, and you'll just do includes. It really makes your code a lot more compact. All right? Because a lot of stuff that you repeat in every page, you don't need to actually have written out in every page. Okay? So that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester. If I go back to 339, what some of you may have or may not have noticed is there's something called Lesson Builder here. This is me in the intermediate stages of your auto grader. Okay? If you were to click on it, and you click on Assignment 7, it's going to pop up a little window, and there's going to be some warning errors, messages. Sorry about that. I don't have permission to do this yet. Okay? This is me trying to get it so that I can send your grades directly to CTools. All right? So this is the same auto grader, just right now it won't send your grades automatically to CTools. You could put in your URL, so I'm just going to put in, I made one here. And it'll run through it and be like, oh, I'm looking for a title, I'm looking for an external style sheet, boom, boom, boom. It goes through and it's, here's all the things I'm looking for. All right? I'm going to admit it's not looking for everything in the assignment because of that. But for instance, if you see something in red, hey, I found lists in the navigation. Okay? It doesn't like that. If you see red, you need to fix something. Okay? I did not find a table tag, different things like that. So that's what the auto grader is going to do. Okay, you're just going to upload your file, you'll pick one of them, and run it through. Okay? So can anyone tell me the difference between my auto grader that's kind of going through and looking for particular elements inside the page? How is that different from what the validator does for W3? Like the big difference is in their roles. So my auto grader is simply checking for the requirements of Assignment 7. Right? What is the validator for W3 doing? Yes?
Making sure it's all valid, like CSS and things?
Yeah, so this one actually is just checking for valid HTML tags. Things like for every begin tag, do you have an ender? Do you have a begin and an end tag? All right? There's another validator for CSS. Right? But it goes through and it's just checking one of the one of the errors someone found was it kept saying that the head tag, there was something wrong with the head tag. But it was a kind of oblique, weird error message. In a valid HTML5 document, you have to have a title. So the real problem was that they didn't have a title, but the error message was saying something about, you're missing something from the head. All right? So it gives you kind of weird errors. You always want to start at the top because one missing end paragraph tag can mess up your whole page. All right, so you start at the top, make one fix, go to the next one. We're only concerned about errors and not warnings because most systems are still going to issue warnings just because as HTML5 is still being developed, it's still changing. They don't want to put up some sort of guarantee that this is a truly HTML5 compliant document because for all they know, last week there was some change. All right, so everyone will have a warning that says, it's correct, but don't quote me on that. All right, so everyone will have that warning on it. Okay? So we good? I think I moved the due date back to like the 11th, something pretty far back. I'll have office hours next week if people want to come in and look at it. My assumption is everyone's going to get a full 100 on this assignment, all right? My assumption really in this class is that you guys are probably going to get 100% on almost everything. You know, I try to make the requirements in there, okay? All right, so we're going to switch today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about JavaScript. Right? I'm not going to talk a lot about the details of JavaScript because for people who are just beginning to program, you don't need it as much as you used to. All right? Before, you needed a lot of JavaScript for doing what we call client-side validation. All right? Client-side means your own browser would check things. But HTML5 made it so that you don't need to do that as much because the new tags will validate for you. Can anyone give me an example of a tag we talked about Tuesday? Email. It will automatically check to see if it's in the form text at text dot something. Right? It's not going to check to make sure it's a real email address, right? But it does the very basic checking for you. All right? And there are some others that we can put in. We can have range. We can have elements can have a range attribute that will automatically check for you whether the number they put in fits inside the range. Okay? So we need to do a little bit less JavaScript because of that. All right? We also have, because of when we learn PHP, we're going to learn how to do additional checking on the server side. The other reason we don't need to do quite as much JavaScript is because we're going to learn about jQuery. All right? jQuery uses JavaScript but bundles things together for you. So it's performing JavaScript, but it's doing it in little functions. So I made you learn the hard way about CSS and HTML for assignment 7, but then after this you're going to be able to use Bootstrap. Right? You can use Bootstrap to make everything look nice. No more trying to center things, because centering things takes forever. Right? So for the same reason, we're going to learn a little bit about JavaScript, but then we're going to go on to jQuery. Right? And we're just going to try to use the HTML tags. Right? But you need to know a little bit. You will not get a job if you go in and say, no one uses it. My 339 teacher said, no, that doesn't work. Okay? So a few things, just so you know. It's called JavaScript. It has nothing to do with Java. All right? It was just a popular programming language. We're going to call it JavaScript, but it's actually much more like C, which I know a lot of you are a little bit more familiar with C than Java. Okay? It's very powerful and very flexible. If you decide that you do really love JavaScript and you don't want to worry about jQuery, you'll be able to do some amazing things if you really kind of dedicate yourself to it. So it's not something that's not worth learning. It's just one of many tools. All right? If you want to learn a lot more, I just put the wiki page. They do have some in the textbook about it as well. All right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you guys go through just the first 2 or 3 short things of JavaScript on Code Academy just to get your feet wet. All right? To learn basically about variables and functions. So you have all seen JavaScript in action. Right? I dare one of you to say you have never seen a pop-up box. All right? People love JavaScript and they love their pop-up boxes. All right? I don't even make that a part of an assignment anymore because it's even annoying for me, you know, to have things pop up. However, I do use the pop-up boxes sometimes when I'm debugging my code. It's like, wait, how come nothing's happening? And sometimes you can use the debugger, but sometimes I just put an alert statement in there to kind of see what's happening. So one of the main things people use in JavaScript is the alert function, which will pop up the infamous box. Okay? Which, just so you know, this box looks like this because I was using Chrome. If you're using Firefox, it looks different. If you're using Safari, they look different. That's what we call browser dependent. Okay? Then there's also prompt boxes. All right? And you'll be going through these a little bit in the tutorial. The difference between the alert and the prompt is that it's going to actually read in whatever you type in and store it in a variable. Okay? The important thing to know about alerts and prompts is that people need to hit OK or cancel in order for your code to keep going. All right? So you need to be aware that if you're going to use these, if people tend to have a lot of windows open. Right? And if a box pops up and they're quickly moving pages around, browsers around, and they don't see your alert box, they're going to think your page is frozen. So I have a few examples of that today that you may want to look at. Speaking of which, if you go into CTools, some of the code is online. Some of it's in CTools. I uploaded a file called Week 5. So any of the code I do today, it's either already online on Dr. Chuck's page or it's in CTools. Okay. All right, so a few kind of basics. With Java, just like with HTML and with CSS, white space doesn't matter. Right? Tabs, new lines, a bunch of spaces in between, those are all ignored. Okay? We do now use the curly braces for begin and end. If you want some sort of set or block of JavaScript to be considered together like a single statement, you'd use the curly brackets. And this is very important, and what you'll forget a lot, you need to use semicolons. Okay? Whenever you use the curly brackets, you're going to want to end each statement with a semicolon, similar to CSS. And in the same way with CSS, you can technically leave it off on the last line. Right? The curly brace acts as a semicolon. But it's a bad habit to get into, because later if you decide to add an extra line, you're going to need to remember to go in and check. Okay? Comments. All right? Comments are similar. You actually have multi-line comments and single-line comments. Okay, so these are the same as CSS, and this would be the same as a lot of the other programming languages you've used, Java or C.
Where does this JavaScript code go?
That's a great question. We actually have that. JavaScript code can go in the head, just like the CSS. It can go in the head. It can go directly into your HTML code, or it can go in an external file. And we'll use all three today. We'll kind of take a look at how each one goes. And it's the same idea as CSS. If you want to be able to reuse it across multiple pages, you'd keep it in an external file. If you want to use it multiple times in a single page, you'd have it in the head section. And if you only want to use it on one line of embedded code, you'd put it right in there. Okay? People are not as strict about the convention of having external JavaScript as they are for external styling. We really like you to have your HTML separate from your CSS. Content styling should be very separate. The idea of having JavaScript is more functionality, and the functionality really does tie itself closely to the content. So it's not as uncommon to see JavaScript right there in the file. Okay, so last one on syntax, and then we'll start doing some JavaScript. Okay? If you don't know what a type-specific language is, then this first statement makes no sense to you. Okay? But for those of you who've taken, say, C, you always had to do things like int number, or string name, or char name. You had to give every single variable you were ever going to use a name. Okay? You don't need to do that in JavaScript. I can simply call something a variable, and I can say Colleen, and I can say Colleen equals 12. And then later in the code, I can say, name equals 12. And then later I can say name equals Colleen. Then I can say name equals 2.2. This is a scripting language. It's meant to run very quickly. All right? It doesn't need to compile or anything. So you don't need to worry when you're doing variables about what type it is. There's a lot of flexibility there. Okay? And you create variables by using the keyword var. Okay? We'll also be making some functions, because the whole point of JavaScript is usually to reuse it across multiple sections of your page. And to make a function, we use the word function. So pretty simple to start off the bat. The last thing I wanted to introduce to you before we start doing the code is this idea of looping. All right? Have any of you seen a for loop before? Okay, most people have. I always like to check. So the general idea with the for loop is we start off, I is a variable. I could, if I wanted to, put var in front of it if it hasn't been someplace else. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to start off for I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, okay, which means add 1 to I. So this is going to loop through 10 times, from 0 to 9. Yay, okay, just checking that. And each time, it's going to pop up an alert box. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and this code is actually in the slides on the next page, but I also have it here. Okay. I know, super exciting. I changed it slightly for this page, and then I decided to use looping and a function and a variable. I wanted to use all of them. All right, so the first key is if you're going to do JavaScript, all right, and this is an HTML file, not a JavaScript file. If you look at it, it's called looping.htm. I've said I am going to do some JavaScript, so I need to put that in a script tag. Okay? I'm going to declare a function. I'm going to call it looping, and every time I want to loop, I'm going to give it a number for how many times I want it to go. Here is the end of my function. And then the last thing I want to do is call my function. It doesn't do you any good to write functions if you forget to call them later. All right? And everyone giggles, and then everyone does it. All right? So it doesn't really do any good to do that. So I changed it a little bit. So in this example, it'll only run oh, that's a good question. Does anyone know why it's doing it twice? Because I actually have it open twice. Let me do this again. All right. That was a very weird bug I did not expect to happen. But I had the program running twice, and so it was running it kind of next to each other. All right? The second time it worked, so we'll ignore the first time. Okay? So that's just a really simple example of how we would do looping. Okay? All right, so this goes back to your question. All right, JavaScript sounds great. I can set up annoying messages over and over and over again until people stop trying to hack my page. All right? But clearly you want to do a little bit more with it with that. If you want to use JavaScript, you can put it directly into your HTML, into an HTML file with the script tag. Make sure you have the begin and the closing tag, the opening and the closing tag. All right? That basically tells the JavaScript what's JavaScript and what's HTML, because sometimes it's actually a little hard to know what you want showing on the page. So if someone's viewing the page, anything inside the script is not going to be viewable. Right? That's not text. If they wanted to see the script, what would they do? Could they see it somehow?
View source.
View source. Yep. It's still there in view source. It's still part of the HTML page. The browser just knows not to render it. Okay? Here's something tricky though. What most people do is they write internal JavaScript to kind of test it and see if it works. And then once it works, like, great, I'm going to go put this in an external file so I can use it later. All right? When you move JavaScript to an external file, to an actual file that has a .js extension, you should not have the word script around it. All right? So this is inside an HTML file. If I were to take this outside of an HTML file, I'd need to make sure I take the script tags out. All right? If this was a looping.js, I'd want to take it out. All right? I'd take it out, and then I would have in here script source equals my script.js and the script. And this should go in the head section. So now in the head, you're going to have your title, your link to your style sheet or sheets, and a link to your JavaScript. Okay, so it started off with nothing, and we're slowly getting it bigger and bigger as you go along. All right? After a while, it's not even about your content anymore. The stuff in body almost isn't even going to change. Right? What's going to be changing is our style sheets, our media query files, and different things like that. Okay. So as I mentioned, you have some basics. One is, what if I want to actually have something show up on the page? You'd use document.write. Right? That would just kind of spew out into the HTML whatever you put inside the write command. Another way, which you're more likely to use, though, is we're going to go back to the idea of the DOM. Remember how we said you really want to understand this idea of the DOM model, how we have the body, and inside the body you're going to have paragraphs, and some of them might have IDs, some of them might have class names. It can actually go in and find an element, say a paragraph, or a div, or an anchor, and if you use the .inner HTML attribute, you can change what shows up in there. Okay? So typically, if you want to access an element, you're going to use the document.getElementById. And I'll show you this a whole bunch of times. Okay? One more slide, and then we'll do examples. I believe, have we done anything with on-click or on-change or mouse down in this class? What was that? Hover. Yeah. So it's kind of this idea with hover, how there are different actions or events that can happen. All right? So usually you think of things like buttons or links, but you can really have events happen on anything. You can have your mouse hovering over a paragraph. You can have your mouse clicking on an H1 element. All right? So there are actually elements or events linked to every type of element. They're not all the same, but a lot of them overlap. Okay? So we're going to look at 4 very quick examples that are online. So if you were to click on these right now, you'd go out onto Dr. Chuck's page and kind of see what happened. All right, so I'm going to do them one by one. Here's the first one, HTML file. This is an internal JavaScript. All right, we've got the here's my document. I've put my script not in the head. I've embedded it directly into the body of the code. Okay, and then I have another H1 header. So what happens? What do you expect to actually show up on the page? Someone yell out something that you expect to see on the page. And your mom might be watching right now on the webcast, so do her proud. Here's my document. And yeah, pop-up window. And how about here's my second header? Kind of expecting to see these things show up. I believe I made this a link. Oh, I made it really big. Let's make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to reload it for a second. One of the things you might notice is it says, here's my document. It is not going to show the rest of the page until I click OK. Right? So if you decide you're going to start putting JavaScript inside the body of your document, you need to realize, oh, all right, they may not actually get to see anything that goes below it unless they fill out whatever it is I'm waiting for them. So that's kind of just a very simple example of, oops, wrong one, of putting it right inside the body. Okay? The next one is another kind of interesting thing where I'm going to include this idea of the events and also this idea of true and false. Typically when we have a link, if we click on it, we go to it. As long as it's even if it's not a valid link, we still go to that error page, that 404 page not found. Right? In this example, we're simply going to put in 2 links. All right? I'm going to say, here's the 2 links. I'm going to include on-click events. Both of them are going to give an alert. So it's either going to say ouch or yow. All right? This is Chuck's example, not mine. Okay? And then over here, we're expecting to, in both cases, we're going to go to the main U of M page. All right? The big difference, all right, between these 2 different links is that this one ends after the alert, and this one has a return false to it. All right? If you don't have return false, it's assumed it's a return true in a way. So I'm going to go ahead and open this one up, see if I need to make it smaller again. So if I click on Plan A, it says ouch, I hit OK, and we go to the U of M site. Okay? Not too surprising there. Now I'm going to click on Plan B, it says yow, and I don't go anywhere, which is kind of odd. Okay? Let me go back here so you can look at this. So why do we not go anywhere? Whenever you, oh, sorry, yeah, did you have a? Okay. It's this idea of if you're going to return false, you're saying stop. Stop what you were doing. I know that I'm in the middle of basically an action or function. I don't want you to do it anymore. So it's kind of odd to see return false in this example. But you know how a lot of times you have OK or cancel? Cancels will have return false. They'll say, I don't want you. I've filled in all this form. I'm a little confused. I've changed my mind. I do not want to sign up for 6 years of DirecTV. So you're going to click cancel. And it basically says clear out. If you had a form, it'll clear out what was in the form, right, if you put that in. Okay? So again, nothing huge going on here, just little tiny examples. At the end, we'll do something a little bit bigger. Okay. Now, where's my JavaScript? It's in the head section. Okay? So I've moved it out. It's no longer in the body. So I would go through here, and it's going to say hello world. All right? But I've put in here that I'm going to say body, here's an event, important to learn the different events, onload the message. So every time I load this page, it's going to call this function. All right, so I'm just going to show this real quick. Nothing too exciting there, but here's my question. I'm going to take a look at it. It's right here. What would happen if I got rid of the onload call my function? Is this going to change anything? Will the page be exactly the same? So what did body onload do? What does the onload do? If I look at it this way, it's going to say, whenever I load the page, I want you to call this function. Right? And notice, you need to have the parentheses. Okay? So it'll go first, it'll go up to the head and see if you have any, it'll see if there's a function called message here. If there isn't, it will go and see if there's an external JavaScript file. It'll search for it there. All right, so it'll be great, I found it. If I get rid of the onload equals message, I can still run this page. Nothing breaks. Just the alert box is gone. This would be an example of writing a function, but if you don't ever call it, it's never going to happen. All right, so you can write lots of functions, but you need to have somewhere on load, on click. You need to call the function right inside the code. All right, but you need to make sure that you can kind of go back and forth. Okay, the last one is an example we're going to make bigger and bigger. I'm doing a very small example, and then this one's going to get a lot bigger as we talk throughout the day. All right, this one, I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then we'll go back to the code. This one just has two links back and forth, and we start off and it says hello stuff here. So I'm just going to put stuff here. In fact, I'm going to call it lots of stuff should go here. Okay, hello, lots of stuff should go here, there. All right. Now, go back over here and you can see, well, I've made a span. What's the difference between a span and a div? So going to ask you this on the midterm. Give me one example. There's a lot of differences, but can anyone give me an example? Yes? Span is inline. That's probably the most basic answer. And if something's inline, that means it just continues across the page. If it's block, div is block, it kind of forces a new line on either side. Takes up, by default, the width would be 100%. All right? So if something's a div, you can give it a height and a width. If something is span, you cannot. You can give it padding and margin, but you can't give it a height and a width. Okay? So here, I have a little span, and that's where I put the lots of stuff should go here. And I've given it an ID of stuff. All right. So what's going to happen here is when I click on one of these links, on click, document.getElementID by stuff. Remember how I talked about that a little bit? What's going to happen is, should make this a lot smaller. Bless you. It's going to go through. It's going to find whatever ID has stuff. So how many occurrences of stuff should we find? 1, 5, 10, 0. Is 0 okay? 0 is okay. Is 1 okay? Is 2 okay? You should only have one. Each ID should be unique. So it's going to go find the first and hopefully only incidence of stuff. Blah, blah. Oh, here it is. It's going to find out what's called the inner HTML, the HTML that's associated with that with that ID. And it's going to replace it with the word back, okay? Because we hit the back button. Same thing if we hit the fourth, back and forth button. It's going to take anything that's in there and replace it with fourth. So I will run this. Here's my lots of stuff. So we can start manipulating the actual contents of the DOM with JavaScript. All right. Why is this at all cool? Because now we can do things. We can go in and we can say, would you like to sign up for my newsletter? And when the person hits yes, we can say, great, I'm going to change the contents of my HTML page, and suddenly I'm going to show them a sign up div. I'm going to give them a place to put in their email and their name and their preferences. If they hit no, I'm going to leave it closed. This is particularly important when we think about responsive design. We want all of our pages to have the same functionality, whether they're looking on a big screen or something small, right? But the same functionality doesn't mean the same look. We can have on our smaller design more options. We can say we're going to hide a lot of stuff on the initial view, but as they click what they'd like to see, it'll just appear. They're not going to a brand new page. We're not sending them all over the place. We're just making some things visible and some things not. Because just as we can change the content, we can change the class and the styling. Are there any questions about that so far? I realize it's still kind of abstract. Yes?
So I'm trying to figure out where exactly the JavaScript goes.
Okay.
So what's the point of having a separate JavaScript file? Because it kind of looks like you're defining all the JavaScript stuff in the HTML.
Okay.
So do we treat like the JavaScript file kind of like in C++, like a header file, where you define the functions and everything there?
Yes. Yeah. It's the same. It's the case where you might. Oh, sorry. Go ahead there.
Isn't it pretty common practice to put the JavaScript at the bottom, though?
Actually, I don't see a lot of people put it at the top. It depends on how. See, it's the thing is, it depends on how big it is. In the first example I'm going to give you, we're going to look at that coach's sign-up form from Tuesday, but I compacted it a little bit. And the only JavaScript that's in there is checking to see if the two emails are equal to each other. They're put in it. You know, a lot of times you have to put it in twice, and then they check to make sure the two values are the same. For something really small like that, a lot of people just put it in the top. All right. Otherwise, if you have a lot, you're going to more likely put it at the bottom, because when people do view source, they're rarely doing view source to see your JavaScript code. All right? They're doing view source in order to look at, you know, the contents, and so the JavaScript will be at the bottom. All right?
When you say bottom, do you mean below the closing HTML tag?
Not outside the closing. It still has to be inside HTML, but it'll probably be outside the body.
That way the DOM can load.
Yeah, because otherwise, here's an interesting kind of thing to mention. If the page has not yet rendered this line of code, if I tried to run this command, it wouldn't know what to do. If I had made this into a function and said body on load, you know, depending on how quickly it loads, kind of any lag, it might go, oh, this doesn't exist yet. So the order does matter. You can't kind of run JavaScript inside the body of your HTML unless you're sure that all the elements are already there. Things are going to get started. We're going to have to be a little more organized as we go into JavaScript, and especially PHP, as far as how much of our page has actually been rendered to the screen versus how much is still in the process of being rendered. Okay? But one of the good reasons for using an external sheet is, who here ever thinks they might take someone else's JavaScript? Yeah? All right. Sometimes it just makes your code a little cleaner and a little bit safer as you're first playing with it to take that code, put it in an external file, and then call it, right? Because then you don't need to go look for a lot of places. You can go and you can reuse it across a lot of pages. And I'll give you an example in a little bit of when we use it across a lot. Okay? So I'm going to give you some examples of the document.getElement by ID. Okay? We're going to kind of hide and close things. I have an intro JavaScript, very small. We're just going to make a paragraph go away and come back and hello, goodbye, hello, goodbye. Then I have intro, kind of a second example. The third example is the same thing as the second, only now I've taken out the JavaScript and put it in a separate file. I've taken out the CSS and put it in a separate file. So this is really good for me to explain because everything's on one screen, and we can scroll up and down. But I would probably implement it. I actually did implement it as the third example where I have 3 different files: my HTML file, my CSS file, and my JavaScript file. Okay, so these ones are not on the slides because it was too much code. Basically, if you can't fit it on a slide, then sometimes you have to go back. Okay, so this is a pretty simple page. I'm just going to kind of show you an example. This is a paragraph. I can go in and I can change the contents. All right, so let's see the code that did that. Okay, so I have my HTML. I put my script up in the top. You often put it in the head when you don't want it to happen automatically. All right, you want to call this function when somebody does something, when there's an event. All right, if you put it inside the body, it often is automatically executed. So I have a new function called displayDate. It's going to search the page, find the div or span or paragraph or whatever element it is. But some element in there probably has an ID of demo. Okay? And I want to take whatever inner HTML or whatever content used to be there and replace it with date. All right, well, if we scroll down here, it's kind of nice that Sublime is putting all our JavaScript in kind of this nice blue and our HTML in the pink. So here's date. Date doesn't exist anywhere else in this page. And I'm not linking to any external files. Don't forget, JavaScript, like many other languages, have a lot of built-in functions for you, right? So you can go through and learn about the different functions that are already there and learn that, oh, date returns what the current date is. You could go and realize, oh, and if I say date and give it like L, give it these different arguments, it'll show the date in different ways, just hour, minute, minutes, seconds. So it's going to go through. Okay, so I've written this function. The question is, when does this function get executed? Does anyone remember how I made it show up? There was a little button, right? When I clicked on the button, it went there. So I have here a button. Type is button, right? On click equals display date. So I actually, inside the HTML, you're going to put the function call. You're going to say, based on this event, this is what I want you to do. In this case, if I have on click, I want to show the date. I believe mouse over would even work. Mouse over is really bad. Mouse over is going to make things happen anytime you try to just move your mouse around the page. Things are going to be popping up and coming down. All right? And so it'll go ahead and display the date. So I'm going to reload this. Oh, I don't have to. Click display date, and now there's the date. Hooray! All right. What I did here is I changed the content. What if I want the original page back? In this scenario, what do I need to do? I need to reload. Okay, so this was the, hey, if I only want to do one thing, here's an example. You guys could all put this in and make it happen. Right? But the next step clearly is, let's have two buttons. Right? Let's have two buttons that kind of goes back and forth and shows one thing or the other. So that, not too shockingly, is JavaScript 2. Okay? So now I'm going to have, before I change the content, now I'm going to leave the content alone. I'm going to change the styling. All right, so I can have, oh, it's already open. Close, open, close, open. I can kind of go back and forth. So before I was changing the content, and now since I want to change the styling, it's not the HTML really. The question is, do I want to change the HTML or do I want to change the style sheet? Your first thought might be, I want to change the style, but it's still the HTML that you're going to change. So let me show you how this one works. All right, so I've written two functions now. One called close me and one called open me. I'm real big on mnemonic names. All right, so I'm a fan of those. So now I'm still going to get the element by ID. Before I was getting the element by ID and then doing dot inner HTML equals. Now I'm saying, hey, do me a favor. This is a variable. Right? Grab whatever element out there is called demo. Then what do I want you to do? I want you to change the class name to gone. So if you remember, every element can have class equals. It can have multiple class equals. I'm going to change it so that the class name now is gone. And if I look up here, you can see gone is display none, and back is display visible. That's whether or not you can see something. Okay, so you head down here. Way down here, I finally get to my HTML. Here's my ID for my demo. Way down here is where I do on click, I call open me. All right? On click, I call close me. All right? So you're just going back and forth, and every time you click it, it's going to go up, it's going to find where the ID equals demo. I start off with no class at all. All right? Is there any class here? No? That's okay. It's going to go in and it's going to change the class, because by default, things are visible. So I didn't need to worry about that. People okay with that? This is when you all nod along, and then when I make you code it, you're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, you said it, like when you change the class thing and the display equals like none or whatever.
Yes.
What if you wanted to, like, I feel like, is this a way to embed, not really embed, but like put different pages on one page, I guess? So like, say you click on one link and it displays like a paragraph there, you click on another button, it'll display a paragraph there. How would you set it?
So that's the very next example we're going to do. And I have just sections, but if it's how you mentioned other pages. If you remember, we do have frames, so you can kind of, so it's not even so much that you kind of have to make that decision as to whether you're going to insert new code, which you can do, or just have the code there and kind of hide and show, hide and show, hide and show. All right? If you just want to have it visible, not visible, visible, not visible, that's going to be when you change the class equals. All right? If you actually want it to be there versus not want it to be there, then you'd use the .inner HTML to change it. My concern with changing the actual content is then you have to remember, if you want to ever get it back, you need to make sure that you have some variable that has what the old content was. There's a little bit more bookkeeping involved with that. Okay? That's a good question. So this is this, I just wanted to show you, so that was that one, but here's the difference if I break everything up. Here's my JavaScript file. Same exact JavaScript, but no more scripts on either side. Okay? I can now use close me and open me in other files. The downfall is that it would only be looking for things called demo. All right? But I could change that. Can anyone give me an idea of how I could change that so that it's not always looking for something called demo? Right here, I hard-coded this value. What's the opposite of hard-coding a value when you're programming? You know this.
Put in a variable.
Yeah, put in a variable, right? I could call it like E for element or something like that. And then I could just pass it up here. So I could call close me and open me. I could give it any ID name I wanted to. Okay, so we could reuse this code over and over. We'll do that in the next iteration. Okay, now by the same kind of token, there's something called gone and there's something called back. If I defined the two classes, gone and back, internally, no one else can use them. Right? But if I put them in their own separate style sheet, then everyone has access to this idea of gone and back. I can now reuse both the style sheet, and because the style sheet's external, I can reuse the JavaScript. Okay. And I don't know if I actually have. Yes. And then all I need to do is make sure I go in here and say, hey, here's my style sheet, and here's my JavaScript. And then it's now a much smaller bit of code. Right? Now we're really just talking about what's going on this page. Okay? So there's plus and minuses to internal, embedded, in the head, external. But you'll kind of get used to what you want to do. Right? Okay, so this is a lot of code. Sorry. Kind of threw it up there. It's from the coach sign-up sheet that's online. So if you wanted to look at this, it'd be online. I just want to give an example of something completely different. Up till now, we've been dealing pretty much with just changing the contents or changing the styling. All right? What this example does is this is the example where you're going to type in 2 email addresses. Okay? And I'm hoping what it's going to do is help make it a little bit clearer the difference between ID and name. All right? Because those are 2 things we use a lot, but they can be confusing as to when you use each one. All right? So up here's my HTML. All right? It's all good. I used a label. I have an input type, which is email, and another input type, which is email. But I gave them 2 different IDs. And in this case, I used 2 different names. All right? So someone mentioned, and they are completely right, if I make something of type email as opposed to type text, what's the difference? Before, everyone used text. And then HTML5 came along, and we're like, oh, I'm going to use email. What does it do?
Requires the @ sign.
Yeah, it requires the @ and the dot, the kind of format. However, what we want to do is we want to make sure 2 email addresses are the same, that they put in identical email addresses in both fields. And HTML doesn't 5, there is no validation for that that's built in. This is something specific that we want. Okay? So I went ahead, I put in a script. So the fact that you see script here and here, is this part of an HTML file or a JavaScript file? HTML, why? Yeah. Because if it was, no, it's an HTML file. Because if this was if you see the script tag, then you're like, oh, this is inside the HTML. All right, these little clues to kind of help you along when you're cutting and pasting. A new function called check input. It's expecting that you're going to give it something. You're expecting it's going to give you some sort of value. Okay? In this case, and we'll figure out what it is in a second. What do? We go up here. Hey, they enter an email address. When they type in that first email address, should we check anything yet? Not really. It's not until they enter the second email address that we can go and be like, are they the same? All right? So as soon as it says on input, that does not mean as soon as you start typing. It means as soon as you start typing and hit enter. All right? Otherwise, you get that error message on every key you put in. All right? So on input means you've typed something in or you've clicked something and you've hit enter. You're trying to kind of not submitting it, but you're done with that field. What it's going to do this is the only part that's a little bit confusing, I hope, is check this. Programmers love the word this. It's the worst possible word to lecture about, because try to lecture about the word this without using the word this like 18 times. All right? But what it means is find out which element right now I'm using. So in this case, this means email address repeat. Okay? That's what this is referring to. All right? So since this is referring to email address repeat, in your head you can go, okay, every time they talk about input, what they're really talking about is email address repeat. All right? So you can kind of stick that in your head. All right? So then it just goes through and it goes, hey, if my value doesn't equal the document.get element by ID email address, which is this one value, then I want to give a warning and then say, hey, this doesn't work. Okay? The input.set custom validity blah, 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 that's a JavaScript command that'll pop up the little, it's not really a box, it's not an alert box. It's that little kind of faded box, and we'll look at it in a second, that, you know, when you're putting something in, it says, that's not a good email address. All right? Otherwise, great. If there's nothing in here, it's just going to let you keep going. Okay? So this is what we use to kind of check to see if two email addresses are the same. You could use this for anything. If you want to check anything that you want to make sure are the same or not the same, you can use that. All right? So suppose you want to give the world's least secure password checker. All right? And all you want to make sure is that their password is not password. All right? You could have something where it'd be a little less complicated than this, but you say input.value doesn't equal password, you know, or one password. You can have your own kind of very lame password security checking, you know, type idea. Okay. All right, so this is actually my last kind of slide for the topics, but we're going to do a lot with it. Okay? So what you want to do, and this goes back to your question of how can you really make the page look really different for a functional reason. Okay? You can go past just changing the CSS. You can go into inserting code. Okay? And using variables to store data that you want stored for a long time or across multiple pages. So let's consider the select statement. Do you guys remember what select does? Or what the select tag, input tag is? Hello. The drop-down box. You know, you can select from one of multiple options. All right? So a lot of times, if you look at code, you'll see that those can be really long. So I'm going to go ahead and link to, I think this is, oh, that might be bad. I did view source. I put the link in for view source. I apologize. But you actually want to look at http wines pto science.org. Okay. I can do this for a second. Oops. Okay, so they have this nice little science form, and one of the things they ask people are, you know, will you coach? And here's my list of different things you can coach. Okay? Kind of long. All right? So if you were to do the view source, it's all going to be there. A lot of times you want to ask the same question multiple times. You want to know, do you want to select from this? You want to give them the same choices over and over and over again. Your code can get really big and ugly. If I do view source here, you can see here's my whole select statement. Imagine you wanted to ask or give that select option 5 times. Your code is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? In view source, it's always going to be big. But it'd be nice if in the HTML that you were writing, the source code you're writing, you didn't have to type in so much stuff. So what I've written for you is just a really small JavaScript function that will go in and say, hey, I've made this array. Every time you want to do a select statement, here's all the values I want you to shove in there. Okay, so confusing, yes? Let me show you the code. Let me show you the new page. There's 2 parts to it. So here's my page. I finally added some CSS because people are going to watch this lecture, so I do more for them than for you. But I've put in a name, what event you would like to coach, all right, would you like to coach a second team, and then I have like the email addresses and things like that. So when I put, would you like to coach a second team, if you click yes, it's going to pop up this brand new section. And inside this section, there's going to be another, it's basically an exact replica of the same drop-down list. Right? If you'd like to coach a third team, because you're like super parent, you know, it can pop up another one or another one as you do it. All right? But the HTML code that we use doesn't really look as much like that as you would expect. So I'm going to go up here. I basically have the hi, how you doing, enter your name. Remember that big select statement where it had like 22 different activities? And it was actually 22 different activities. I didn't write them here. Instead, what I did is I said, hey, I'm going to put a select statement right here, and I'm going to name it name dropdown, because that makes sense to me. I'm going to put a bunch of names, and I want it to be a drop-down list. Okay? So what's going to happen, and then it continues to make the rest of the form. Would you like to coach a second team? You're going to have your buttons, yes or no. I've reused open me and close me, which we had before. Okay? Then I have my ID for my second team. Now I've called it name dropdown 2. All right, so I have one ID called name dropdown and another ID called name dropdown 2. They're the same things, the same values, but why did I call one just name dropdown and one name dropdown 2? It's the same kind of appearance, it'll look the same, but why would I give one a different name from another if it's their IDs as opposed to classes?
You'll be able to tell if they pick different things.
Right, you want to be able to tell if they picked, not only that, because name actually goes more with what's printed out, is if I'm going to make something an ID, it has to have a unique name. Right? If you're going to say ID equals something, it has to have a unique name. All right, I'm going to stress that a lot, and it'll still probably cause some problems. So then I just have the email address and things like this. But if I scroll way down to the bottom, this is where you can see something kind of interesting going on, hopefully. All right? At the bottom of my page, this is just how I implemented it this time. There are other ways to implement it. I have window.onload pop dropdown name dropdown and pop dropdown name dropdown 2. So what I'm doing is saying once you pretty much have all the elements of the page created, okay, what I want you to do is you're going to populate those two drop-down menus for me. All right, you're going to populate the one called name drop-down, and you're going to populate the one called name drop-down 2. Okay, so this is just the HTML code, all right, which hopefully doesn't have anything new other than this kind of window on load idea, which we'll play with. Here's the weird JavaScript. Okay, how do you make a variable again? If you remember, if you use the word var, then you've made a variable that's going to exist for the life of this file. All right? You'll be able to see it inside other functions. All right? You'll be able to reuse it. So I've made two variables, or two arrays. I was lazy. I gave them the same exact values. But usually the names versus the IDs the names tend to be longer than the IDs, because the names are what show up in the drop-down box. Okay? So I have two arrays that are the exact same length. Here's where my drop-down comes from. Okay? So I have a function. I called it pop dropdown. It's expecting me to give it an ID name. Remember how we talked about how open me and close me was okay, but it wasn't great because it would only work on things called demo? Remember, if you go back to the old code, open me and close me only worked on things that were called demo. So now I've made it generic, and you can use something called ID name. All right, so what's it going to do? It's going to go find that ID name, which was drop down and drop down 1 or 2. It's going to go through. It's going to do that for loop. Remember, for some reason, I told you guys about a for loop like an hour and 10 minutes ago? This was why. That whole slide just for this. Okay. What it's going to go through is it's going to loop through my arrays. It's going to say, for everything that's in my array, aerodynamics, bridge building, whatever you want it to be. What I'm going to do is I am going to create an element that did not exist before. Okay? And it's going to be, what kind of element is it? It's going to be an option element, because selects always have options in front of them. You can imagine that it might be radio buttons or checkboxes. It can be anything you wanted it to be. But I'm going to create, in this case, 22 options for you. And each one is going to have a different name. Okay? And then, this is a little weird, I have a select statement. I need you to like kind of put this as part of the select statement. All right? So it's going to go through and just add each one. So imagine again that HTML code. Our HTML code looks like this. Right here. This is the HTML code to make that big drop-down menu. All right. Here, wrong one. Oops. Go back. Here's the same thing. All that stuff is gone. All that really, before when I didn't have this code, all that really long code of select, it's all gone. It's a lot easier for us to kind of look at our code and debug our code. And once you get it working, you can reuse it over and over again. Okay? So that was a kind of hairy piece of code to show you guys up on the board. I apologize for that one. But I think it really shows, hey, look, here we are using functions for opening and closing sections so you can see them where they're hidden. Oh, look, here we are using JavaScript so we can populate things that didn't exist before. Okay? If you can get this basic JavaScript down, you have enough that you're going to be able to go off and use the jQuery and understand what jQuery is doing. Right? And you're going to love jQuery because you want to know what jQuery does for you? jQuery says, you know what? You all have better things to do, so I am going to write this code for you. Right? jQuery writes all these functions for you so you don't have to do it. Right? But it's nice to understand a couple functions on your own before you start saying, I'm done, I'm middle management now. Okay? So what I'm kind of, and as I said, I haven't done it yet, what I'm kind of envisioning for your forms homework, the one where I want you guys to like make a form, is it's the one I talked about a little bit in class before. We have this super long form right now for registration page. If you have another page you'd like to alter, you can pick that one instead. There's a lot of things like, do you need a t-shirt? I do need a t-shirt, but if you don't choose it, people would say, oh, I already have a t-shirt, but I'll take one that's an adult small. All right? It doesn't make sense. You should have one button that says, do you need a t-shirt? If you say yes, then it should pop up a section that says, what size do you want? Otherwise, you shouldn't have an option of selecting something. Has anyone ever done that? My son ended up with 3 t-shirts at summer camp this year because I kept saying yes, no, didn't know if it was the same thing. So you want to hide stuff they don't need to see. All right? You can change different things. A lot of times, there's a lot of links for teachers. Hey, which teacher does your child have? You know, do you want 2 children to do it? What teacher do they have? This would be an example of where you could use JavaScript arrays to pre-populate this so you don't have to keep writing select over and over again. Okay? Right now, the grade is a select statement. I think it'd be nice if instead it was a range because everything's between 2nd and 5th grade. You know, you'll just go in, you're going to change the form. You can see, for instance, this was a good example. Your child has 4 options of which, you know, what's their first choice? What's their second choice? What's their third choice? What's their fourth choice? Some kids don't even get their 4th choice, all right? But this will be a lot nicer to write with a function that pre-populates it. Even better, I've already given you that code because this is the same thing, all right? You can just, there might be a few changes, okay? But there's definitely things you could do to make things neater. I don't believe this is actually, I think this is verified, but you know, go back in, make sure it's verified. Make sure it's an email tag, not a text tag. Okay? A little note, I'm going to fill this in maybe a little bit. I need a t-shirt, my name is AB, 3rd, there we go. Those all look good to me. Me. Good. I'm going to go, I made too many things required. There we go. Oh, well, see, look, I don't have verification in there because I had 2 different email addresses and it let me get away with it. All right, I can also do this. All right, if I leave it like this, if it's an email thing, it says please enter a valid email address. That was performed by the HTML5 because maybe you don't like the message. You can write JavaScript to give you. All right, sometimes the default messages aren't really what you want. And that, by the way, and it's gone. That little box was the one that I said is like the error message that isn't an alert. Remember how we had our little error message before? That's what I was talking about. Okay. All right. So that's the kind of thing that we'll be looking at for the rest of the semester. Also, hey, how would this page look if I was on my phone? How could I change it so it looks better than that? So I'm gonna, as I said, encourage you. Otherwise, it'll be a really big project to get into groups, decide what type of input types should each of these be, okay? How do we want it to look? What kind of styling looks nice? This styling is horrible. It's like a blue border, hooray! All right, it's horrible, all right? There's very little validation, and there's absolutely no resizing, or no change based on resizing, okay? So I will help you get into a group if you don't have one, and we'll probably, not sure, but I'm going to talk to the person in charge of this, and maybe if he picks yours, we'll have a little like extra credit dance or something, or some pizza along that line. Okay, I like to make it motivating. I know a few of you have your own sites that you're working on separate. If there's a form that you'd like to really improve and make better, I can look at that one too. Okay, which kind of brings me to the rest of the semester. We have our speaker next week, and I'm going to do Java or jQuery next week. After that, we're going to take a big jump. I'm going to cover Bootstrap. But we're really going to switch this whole idea of what's going on, underneath the code. Okay? We're going to start learning about PHP that's going to let us do things like grab the form data and manipulate the form data and do things that the users can't see. We're going to try to start moving over to like what we call server-side applications. Okay? You can't do any of this on your Spanish site because it doesn't allow you to do PHP. But everyone has an SI site, so next Tuesday I'll make sure everyone can access it and can get stuff up there. I've also had a few people who are pretty advanced in this class, and they've requested certain things they'd like to have covered, and I want everyone to. As you know, there's a final portfolio at the end of the semester. It does not need to be about you. If you would prefer your final portfolio to be a project you're working on for somebody else, we can work on that together. If you'd like it to be a mix, everyone should leave here with an online portfolio, all right? Everyone needs to leave SI with a web presence that you can be proud of, all right? Because you're UMSI, all right? So you kind of need a web page out there, and it shouldn't say under construction, or it should not say, hi, assignment 4, you need to go on beyond that. But I'm very open to different ideas, okay? Are there any questions? Anything along that line? All right, so maybe you're all just shy. So that's the end for today, and then I'll wait and take all your questions that you never have until I say we're all done. Okay? All right, there we go. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.